It's a really important thing for people to have a realization about the nature of reality. Our body, the biology all around us have a common cause. There is a fundamental field at the source of creation. I've been working on unifying all this for 35 years, from the scales of the cosmology to the scales of quantum mechanics, which currently is fractured in our physics. And that's a big problem. If you access this, all of a sudden you realize the infinite nature of your existence, the incredible potential that you hold. We've called intuition as almost a derogatory word, where in fact intuition is the most valuable. It's like the universe is talking to you, and are you listening? There's a really bright future for humanity if we are able to bring this level of information out.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Know Thyself. Our guest today is a physicist and a researcher who's been shaking up the scientific community with his revolutionary theories and ideas ranging on everything from the structure of space-time to the very nature of consciousness. His unified field theory work suggests a universe that's fundamentally connected at levels we're only beginning to comprehend. And we'll be exploring the implications that his idea has on human potential, who we are, and understanding our place in the cosmos. Nassim Haramein, it's an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. So great to be here with you.
Yeah. Really been looking forward to this, for just meeting with you and connecting and eventually doing this podcast for a while. And so let's just dive right in.
Right on. Yeah, let's skip the weather conversation.
Yeah, how's the weather, the sports?
Yeah.
Straight into the structure of space-time and the nature of reality.
And the nature of reality, exactly. Start with the easy stuff.
Yeah, the light stuff. So I'm curious, just like in your elevator pitch, or like trying to give a high-level overview of your work to somebody in 30 seconds, how would you explain what you feel like you're here to do on the planet and what your work is really about?
Wow, that's a big one. I think it's a really important thing for people to have a realization about the nature of reality, like that coherence and self-organizing systems that we are in, our body, the biology all around us, the structure even of solar systems and galaxies and all this have a common cause, that there is a fundamental field at the source of creation that's producing all the effects we see at the physical level and the biological level. And to unify all this from the scales of the cosmology to the scales of quantum mechanics, which currently is fractured in our physics. And that's a big problem. So I've been working on unifying all this for 35 years, and there's technological applications that come out of it that are really transformative for society. A new way of extracting energy, a new way of dealing with gravity, and so on. So there's a lot, to unpack there.
A lot of your theories refer to reality as a sort of holographic in nature. How do you explain what that is to somebody who's not familiar with that term of like a holographic universe?
The idea that every point contains the whole is what I mean by holographic. So I use it loosely. In the holographic mass solution that I've published in 2012, it's more specific to the way that I am using the equations to describe like a surface to volume ratio, which has been loosely called holographic in physics. There's a thing in physics called the holographic principle that has to do with the entropy of a black hole. And so without getting too technical, basically it says that the entropy of the black hole is equivalent to 1/4 of the information on its surface that's holographically imprinted on the surface. And the entropy is like the thermal emission, the diffusion of energy of this object, if you'd like. And I showed that this diffusion of the surface of the event horizon of a black hole is actually what gives mass to the proton. That the proton, the nucleus of an atom, is like a mini black hole that's diffusing energy, Hawking radiation, and that energy is what we call the mass of the proton. But that the internal energy of a proton is much, much higher than the mass we measure.
I'm really looking forward to unpacking how the whole is weaved within the part and how the information is contained from on the level of a proton throughout the whole cosmos. Could you unpack how you're coming at the understanding of what space-time is and how it's made up of these little grains or pixels in a way?
Right. So let's start with the beginning. But maybe let's do a little parenthesis just to complete what you were saying. If we do it like really naively, the holographic principle appears when you're counting the number of grains in the volume of the proton, and you find that it's equivalent in terms of energy or information as all the other protons in the universe, so that each proton contains the whole, which is a principle. It's a principle of holography. But let's start from the beginning. When Max Planck started quantum mechanics, he did so because he was given the task to make a better light bulb. And the light bulbs at the time were burning out too fast. And he was asked if he could help to make a better one. He was a famous physicist. People thought he could help. And he looked at the theories of the time, and they predicted something goofy about, the emission of thermodynamic emission or the electromagnetic emission of a heating body. It said that the emissions should have infinite amount of ultraviolet. It was called the ultraviolet catastrophe. And when we were measuring the ultraviolet of a light bulb in the laboratory, we weren't seeing infinite amount of ultraviolet. So Planck thought, okay, how can I fix this equation? And in fixing it, he added like a fudge factor. Okay, he called H, a constant that became Planck's constant. And basically, your listener needs to know a little bit of quantum mechanics. Basically, these equations are describing an oscillator, a harmonic oscillator, which is usually represented as a spring with a weight. But the universe doesn't do springs and weights. I mean, it does after it's made the human that makes the spring and the weight. So it's really kind of a bad visual to use, although it's the visual that's taught to students typically when they're learning quantum mechanics. The oscillator is best visualized as a little spinning top, right? That's oscillating. And it's absorbing photons and emitting photons, right? So he described like the little heat that's coming off the filament of the light as like oscillators, and the constant he put in there, like eventually, like imagine you're describing the atom as a little oscillator, right? And the constant that he put in there to make it work so it give the right answer on the spectra of, light that comes off the filament, it predicted something weird. It predicted all the correct values for the different temperatures, having different colors of the spectra, right? Which is the Planck's law. But and it got rid of the infinities for the ultraviolet, but it predicted something more than that. It predicted that they would be, at 0 Kelvin when there's no thermal agitation, there should be no energy. But what the equation predicted is that there's an infinite amount of energy at 0 Kelvin. And so Planck called it 0-point energy. And that's and so basically it said something really weird as well. It said that the constant he added, called h, and then eventually h bar, meant that the oscillator doesn't continuously emit electromagnetic field like thermal radiation, but it does so in packets of energy. So it builds energy and then it releases a packet. It builds, or it only absorbs packets. You understand? And so it was saying something that was not instinctive to him, that like they would be packets, and eventually Einstein took these packets, called them photons, and described the photoelectric effect, which he won the Nobel Prize for. So these packets, or quanta of energy, started quantum mechanics. And as I was saying, the equation on top of it said something weird about the foundation or the ground state of the electromagnetic field. Instead of saying that at 0 Kelvin, when everything is frozen and the little oscillator should be frozen and nothing is happening, it should have zero energy. Instead, it said it had infinite amount of energy, like that there was a bath of infinite amount of energy at the ground state of the electromagnetic field. And so in the paper we just published, we start with that because actually this history of zero-point energy is not necessarily well thought and well understood by the scientific community. And the fact that mathematically you cannot remove the 0-point energy is not necessarily well understood neither, because in history what we did is we removed that ground state because they didn't know what to do with an infinite amount of energy. They didn't like that answer, so and it's not clear. It was the time of the war. People were racing to make the atomic bomb. Maybe it was removed on purpose, because maybe we didn't want certain countries to have an idea that there's infinite amount of energy available, and they were trying to create fission at the time and so on of the nuclei of the atom. Maybe that was removed on purpose, but anyway, it was removed. And we showed that makes quantum mechanic mathematically inconsistent. Technically, it makes the equation commutative when it should be non-commutative. That is, the little oscillator is absorbing photons and emitting photons, right? By removing the 0-point energy, it's like you remove the source of energy. If we go back to the spring, if you stop doing this, the spring is going to stop oscillating, right? It has to have a source. So when you remove the 0-point energy, it's like you remove the source of the oscillator. You still can do math on the oscillator and get the right answer and all this, but now the oscillator physically is missing the source of energy to make it oscillate. Do you understand?
Kind of.
Yeah. Like your car wheel is like an oscillator, right? It's spinning, but you have to put energy in the motor for the wheel to turn. Mm-hmm. If you remove the energy, right, you could still do the math of a wheel turning as if it didn't need energy, but in the real world, it does, right? So all the oscillators that makes up the atoms, like the atoms being these little oscillators that are absorbing photons and emitting photons, well, they wouldn't be able to continue if they didn't have this source of energy in these equations. And to remove it is inappropriate. So we demonstrate that initially. And then we eventually show that that source of energy is actually the source of mass for the atom.
So how I want to try to make this as accessible as possible for our listeners that
Yeah,
are
I'm
tuning in right
sorry. I'm
now.
trying to say it simply.
No, I mean it's the most immense task to try to squeeze down decades of research and work into deep quantum mechanics and physics into a concise way. So I'm just curious, like in the transition of paradigm of our understanding of the structure of space time, these packets of energy,
Yeah.
what's the implication if what the work you're doing is continues to be proven and shown that your theories are true? Like what is that?
The implication is that, oh, okay, the source of the material world, like the atoms, the energy that runs the protons, that makes the proton go, is not some miracle energy that we've called the Big Bang, right? Which is about as good as like dogma in religions where they just tell you, well, God made it, which doesn't really tell you what that is, God, or what is the Big Bang. Like, how did all the energy in the Big Bang arrive, and why is it keeping everything going after it bang, right? Why is it not stopping? Why is it even accelerating in the universe? Like, there's all it all of a sudden grounds this into no, there's a source of energy that was found over 100 years ago, already at the start of quantum mechanics, but that was ignored. That's actually feeding all this reality into existence. It's like continuously feeding, because the little oscillator, when we think oscillation, we have a tendency of thinking linearly, right? Like a spring going up and down, or a thing oscillating, but it's oscillating because it's spinning, okay? And so it would have stopped spinning like seconds after the so-called Big Bang if it didn't have a source of energy. So what I'm saying is that the implication is that all of a sudden we realize there's a source of energy that's running this world. And we wrote this math analytically. It's beautiful. It outputs the mass of the atom, but as well it outputs the forces that we measure at the atomic level and at the cosmological level. It predicts gravity and so on. And so it's actually saying there's only one thing. There's the flow of this energy, and this energy, that this field is producing all of our reality. And now we're applying it to biophysics and finding, like, scaling from that fundamental field, you find that it's the energy at the source of biology as well.
So in this work, as we continue to unpack this, the various different fundamental constituents and structures of reality, like, I know since 1999, you've been doing experiments, spinning plasma at high velocities and seeing how it could potentially be possible to control gravity and bend space-time and, use those curvatures.
Yeah.
So how does this change our understanding of what gravity is and how we can navigate it, manipulate it, so on?
It's really important because, remember, this ground state energy called 0-point energy is an electromagnetic ground state. So it's electromagnetic oscillation that are occurring at the very fine level of the structure of space-time. Super fine, like billions of times smaller than the atom is the wavelength of this oscillation. So it's and so it's really high frequency, really high energy. People say, this is something that your listener might ask, like, why am I not feeling it if it's so much energy? Or like the microwaves that are running, your phone, or the radio wave in the environment right now, you're not feeling neither. Doesn't mean they're not there, right? They're clearly there, and we use them all the time. Well, this is a field that's like so remote in terms of energy and frequency from our current scale that we don't experience it directly, right? But we measure it. It's called the Casimir effect. We know it's there. So later on, after Planck, long after, even Casimir, which wrote these equations in 1947, we were able in laboratory to measure it in 1997. And, we were able to, like, show that you can create a little gradient in the 0-point energy and get force. So we calculated the gradient of this energy when it's inside like a little structure, like a proton, the nucleus of an atom. If the nucleus of an atom is a little smoothie of that energy, if you'd like. And we calculated the pressure it would produce, and we got the strong force, we got the color force, we got the forces that we measure in the nuclei of the atom in terms of the pressure of this field onto the atomic structure. And then we calculated that this pressure changes as you move away from the atom and eventually becomes gravity. And so all of a sudden you have a direct relationship between this 0-point electromagnetic field and the gravitational field. And we can control electromagnetic fields. So we can create our own little smoothie to create our own little gravitational anomaly or gradient in a region of space. And that would allow us to control gravity. And we built this whole society because we learned how to control electromagnetic fields. The next step for humanity is to actually learn to control gravitational field, which could like free humanity.
In what way? Are you talking about the engineering implications of being able to travel throughout the cosmos?
Yeah, if you have gravity control, you're not needing to burn thousands of tons of fuel to like get some rocket into orbit. You can actually levitate, a ship right into the atmosphere very rapidly. You could go to Jupiter for the weekend. I mean, like it changes fundamentally. And it might sound completely outrageous what I'm telling you right now, but think about a week before the Wright brothers flew the first plane. If you went in their village and told people that in a few weeks, the two brothers over there that are making bicycles, they're gonna bring, a few 1,000 pounds of material up in the air with them on it, they would have thought you were insane. And actually, they would have good support to think that, because there was hundreds of papers published in physics in peer-reviewed journal showing that it was not possible. That sounded like over unity. That sounded like free energy at the time. The idea that you could push air, right, fast enough that you could create enough lift to lift the thing that's making the air circulate sounded like not possible, right? And so there was many papers showing that was not possible, but then the Wright brothers did it anyway, right? And so, the idea that we can control gravity and that we can make spaceship that can levitate and go visit our solar system very rapidly and have access to almost infinite amount of resources and completely transform our society might sound like really out there, currently, but it's really just one invention. And it's an invention that I don't think is actually that hard to make, if you understand where gravity comes from, which current theory doesn't. Meaning Einstein told us gravity is the result of curvature of spacetime, but didn't say what spacetime is, right? What is spacetime? What is that thing that's curving? And what I'm showing clearly in those papers is that spacetime is 0-point energy. It's the quantum grain that is flowing like a fluid in spacetime.
Okay, so this is very exciting, and I want to keep unpacking this.
Mm-hmm.
But just as a sidebar, because it came up, and I think it would be good throughout this whole conversation, there's so much overlap between the new novel discovery and scientific thought that's emerging with the ancient wisdom tradition knowledge about human potential and who we are. Many have said we are made in the image and likeness of God. We are vibrational beings that can attune ourselves to different states and frequencies. And I'm just curious, as somebody who's been for a while at the forefront of discovery of like new novel thought, What do you feel about if we are connected to the whole, like you said, if it's imprinted in the parts? What do you think is the reality of us being able to attune to these new discoveries, like the Wright brothers, perhaps, like new discovery where people thought for thousands of years that it would be completely impossible, and then now we just it's everyday life, right? And so
Right.
for somebody who is at the forefront of what may be revolutionary in its implications for integrating into society, what do you think about being able to tune in and attune yourself to those discoveries before they come in?
Well, I think they have a really fundamental philosophical and spiritual meaning, these discoveries. That's the thing. It's not just nice physics to unify physics and nice engineering to make technology. It actually is telling you something very profound about the nature of your existence. It's saying that you're connected to a field of information. That field is fundamental to your existence, that it's nourishing, it's what actually make the coherent process in your body possible. And so that you can attune to this, this field of information or this field of energy, 0 point energy. It was already there in ancient civilization all around the world. They had all kinds of names for it. In the Polynesian island, it was called mana. There was, chi. In certain societies, it was called all kinds of, different ways in different society. But you find it all around the world. They all knew there was a field. And later on, even in modern physics, later on, at the turn of the 19th century and so on, it was called ether, right? There was ether theory. And Maxwell wrote his equation of electromagnetics with an ether present in his theory. He was saying the electromagnetic waves were traveling through an ether and so on. And so to know that that is really there, and it's the source of the material world, and it connects us all because we're all in this field, is like profound, right? Because all of a sudden you're not isolated anymore. In fact, nothing can be ever isolated because it's always part of this field. And you are in constant information transfer with this field. There's a constant emission of photons and absorption of photons going on. Like you're constantly thermodynamically burning, right? Like your Carnot engine running at like 100 Fahrenheit, right? For 80 years nonstop. And if it varies by a few degrees, you're not having a good day that day, right? And you're absorbing photons even through your eyes, you're absorbing information through your senses and all this, feeding it back, and to realize you're part of this incredible feed-forward feedback structure of space-time, that you're participating in a collective that's learning about itself. It really transforms your perspective on your existence and your role in the universe. It has profound meaning, and I could say much more about that, but like generally, that's what it's saying, and your nature is profound. People think of themselves as one thing, but you're 100 trillion cell, 50 to 100 trillion cell. It's non-trivial complexity. There's like billions of chemical change occurring every second in your body. You're making 1 million cells a second to replenish the ones you're losing. It's a dynamic, very energetic thing that you are. And that's only at the cellular level. Each of one of those 100 trillion cells is made of 100 trillion atoms. Okay, that's at the atomic level. So like 100 trillion multiplied by 100 trillion is the density of the atomic structure of your existence. That's highly coherent and coordinated to make you. right? And that's, I mean, I'm getting philosophical here. I just want to make sure your listeners understand. I'm talking based on very rigorous, analytical, mathematical, and physics equations. So I'm not saying this only in the philosophical sense. Like there's a real, true, and I'm writing a bio paper on this right now, biophysics paper on this. Like there's a real, true scaling from this fundamental field into your existence that is the pulse. It's like the fundamental pulse of creation, continuously creating this incredible coherency and recreating it every second. Because we tend to think, oh, we're one thing coherent. And we think of it as like some static thing, like we were put together and we stayed together. But it's nothing static at all. Like in a few days, you'll have replaced all your skin. And in a few weeks, you'll have replaced your bones and your, and your organs and all this. And, in a few months, all of a sudden, you've made a new you, right? And it's like, so you're constantly redoing this incredible coherent behavior, and it's very specific to you. It's not like you and me, we're both humans, but we don't have the same irises and we don't have the same digits, and we don't, nothing is the same, right? We're individual in the oneness of that field because it fractalized to infinity. And in the fractal, every point is the center. So you're not seeing the same thing I'm seeing when we're looking at this cup. You're seeing that side. I'm seeing this side. So we're feeding different information to the field that coheres us into existence. So the field responds with a little bit different information. And so that's why I'm a little different than you, right? So to realize that, like, wow, I'm actually creating as I'm feeding into this field, and this field is feeding me back my experience in this world. Like to realize I'm part of something that I can engineer, that I can get involved in and transform. I think that's a lot of the spiritual practice that you're talking about. It's learning how to, interact with this field and manipulate it to like improve our condition.
Man, it really seems like from the microscopic to the macroscopic, the universe is having all these unique perspectives. And just like through a Nassim and Andre experience, like we are unique perspectives of the universe experiencing itself through our eyes.
Exactly.
And
so every individual, every point in the field is infinitely important. It's giving its own piece to the universe, right? So that it can self-organize into very advanced systems, very advanced complex systems that we're evidence of.
so, I mean, from the biological to the energetic level, we see our inherent interconnectedness that is very real. It's not some spiritual new age woo-woo philosophical idea. It's an existential reality of how life operates and reality works.
Mm-hmm. And you see, the bees are not on a planet that doesn't have flowers, right? Like it's all interdependent. Nature is completely interdependent, and we are interdependent. We don't really have a choice.
Because I, tend to think about this a lot as like, and to what degree have I realized my own interconnectedness, and in what aspect does my own ego identity structure create separateness between others, which is the source of so much suffering. And I think we live in a society where the mythos of separation is so deeply embedded that sees individuals as completely separate individuals and doesn't recognize that interdependency that you were speaking to.
Yeah, you could even think of it technically. Many of our laws of conservation, our laws of thermodynamics starts with this statement: within a closed system, da 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 da. And it's useful for engineering, okay, to like to assume that the system is isolated from everything else in the universe, and so that you can calculate, its energy and so on. However, if you forgot that you made that closed system artificially, now you have the wrong, your view of the dynamics of the universe are a little bit tweaked, right? Because if you look up isolated system in any physics dictionary, it should start, if it's a good dictionary, with the first sentence saying no such thing has ever been found, right? No system can be completely isolated from gravitational fields, from electromagnetic fields. Right? You can't isolate systems.
All are parts of a bigger whole in a way. And
that's right. That's right.
And one of those, I guess, presumptions that we kind of just put to the side is our idea of empty space. And I would love, because a lot of the work that is exploring that empty space isn't actually empty, and our notion of the conventional understanding of space as a smooth continuum and like this empty space. I just love that you're challenging it. And so I just want to keep weaving in and out from the philosophical understandings and how this can be practical for people's lives, but then also the science and what you're doing here. So
well, I'm challenging it, but I'm not. I'm just reminding physicists that it was not only predicted, but measured in laboratory, and that it's necessary for the foundation of quantum mechanics to be consistent, both mathematically and conceptually in physics. You can't have an oscillator that doesn't have a source. And so this is very straightforward, and it doesn't come from me. Space is full of electromagnetic fields fluctuating with infinite amount of energy, or at least with energy all the way to the Planck scale. Which means it has, and the Planck scale is so fine that the frequency is very, very high. Like if the wavelength is short, then the frequency is very high. And so it's incredible amount of energy. At the Planck scale, like a centimeter cube of space has enough energy that if I squish the whole universe into that centimeter cube of space, like all the stars, all the galaxies, all the black holes, everything into imagine how bright that thing would be. Okay, it would still be 39 orders of magnitude not dense enough to describe the 0 point energy. The 0 point energy is 10 to the 93 grams per centimeter cube. It's a huge density, right? So space is actually extremely dense in electromagnetic fields. And that's not a prediction I made. That is right from the foundation of quantum mechanics.
So how do you relate to the empty, the space that is not so empty in between the atoms in our cells, the space between our galaxies that is super vast?
So the error that was made is to ignore that field, and now all you're left with is the things that were in the field. Now you only have the things. So they're isolated. And now you can't realize that the things you're looking at, that you're calling particles, like the protons in the nuclei of the atom, or the atom itself, or the electron, are actually dynamics of that field. If you don't have the field anymore, then you don't know that what you're looking at is just the dynamics of that field. You see? So now you get confused. You think that you're dealing with like billiard balls, when in fact you're dealing with a field dynamic. And that changes everything. So it really, changes things when you put the field back in, and it starts to actually make everything make sense. And I mean, make sense mathematically, and it's describing properly what you're measuring, like the mass, the proton. The standard model does not describe properly where mass come from, right? There's a Higgs mechanism, but the Higgs mechanism only predicts 5% of the mass of the proton. 5%.
Can you unpack this a little bit more? How all the information from the whole universe lies within a proton? Could you explain that?
Okay. That gets a little complicated, but
Let's simplify it for us.
Yeah.
For me as a dumb monkey over here.
Yes, well, that's okay. So there's evidence that so there's these things that are predicted by Einstein field equation that are called wormholes. And it's basically when there's enough energy in a region of space, space-time can curve itself into little tube that connects distant areas, and almost instantaneously. Okay, and these tubes would be Planck-sized tube that connects things. And in quantum physics, there's this thing that we measure in laboratory that particles can be entangled, right? So that if you change the state of this particle over there, this one change instantaneously, even if it's on the other side of the universe, if it's entangled. And now we're starting to discover that this entanglement that we measured in laboratory, maybe the reason for this entanglement is that it's connected through wormholes. And that the particles might act like mini black holes. So that the hubs are black holes and they are connected through wormholes like a network, like a neural network where the server, like an internet network, where the server is the little black hole and the cables are the wormholes. And so, strangely, my equation, when I was kind of calculated the number of bits of information, and so in physics, there's a relationship between energy, mass, E equals mc squared. There's as well a relationship between mass or energy and information. Okay, so where one Planck is a little 1 bit of information, if you'd like. And so I was calculating the information transfer that this little black hole proton in the nucleus of the atom, which never decays, this little oscillator seems to have an infinite source of energy, never decays. Well, I was trying to figure out what is its relationship to the rest. And when I calculated this, I found that the volume in terms of little Planck structures, in terms of little bits of information, has all the information of the rest of the universe in it. Okay, because it's connected through the little wormhole to the whole rest of the universe.
You're able to calculate the mass of the universe within the single proton.
Within a single proton. And when we use standard equation to calculate the rest of the mass of the universe, we end up with 4.9% the mass of the universe. The rest we have to invent in dark matter and dark energy. 96% of the mass of the universe, we have to put it in as a fudge factor. But in this case, when you do it with the proton like that, you get the exact density of the universe. You get the exact mass, not needing to do any fudging. You get the...
It's mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing because you're studying a teeny thing inside the atom, like it's so small, and you get answers about the nature of the universe.
Can you give us an understanding of how small like a proton is in terms of...
Yeah, so like I was saying, cells are already small because you made a 50 to 100,000 cell. Trillion cell, yeah, that's a lot of cell, right? So they're already small, and each cell is made of 100 trillion atoms, so that's small, okay? And then if you take an atom and you say, okay, the atom size is the electron cloud, right? Well, if the electron cloud was the size of the dome at the Vatican, then the proton would be the head of a pin in the middle. Okay? So the atom is 99.99999% space. And that space is full of electromagnetic fluctuation. And the little proton in the middle, you can't say it's a billiard ball when you do the physics of it. It's all you can say is that in that region of space, there's a really high energy density, okay, that you're describing as a particle. But it's not like a billiard ball.
Right.
Right?
It's not necessarily physical in how we would describe it.
That's right. When you're looking at the physics of physicality, you find that there's no real
physical.
Yeah, it's not really physical. It's all field interaction.
Yeah.
It's all exchange. It's all ratio of exchange of information. And so it's remarkable. It's mind-blowing. Like I would have to run you through a lot of equations and we would be here forever. But there's many moments in these equations when I would run you through, your brain would just splatter on the walls because it's like, whoa, it's so incredible. Like one of the things I calculate, I figured out this ratio, right, of the scaling from this Planck field, from what I call the Planck plasma. So it's a plasma where the particles of the plasma is the Planck size oscillators, right? And I calculated so if it's making wormholes of Planck size, connecting things, then the stuff that's going through the wormholes has to be smaller than the Planck size. So
how is that even possible, right? Because isn't the Planck size?
Then you have to go super luminous, right? The Planck size defined the speed of light. You have to go, you gotta go super luminous because you're inside the black hole, right? And so I calculated because now I know the scaling. So I was able to calculate that. So I was able to calculate how fast the information is moving and entangling all the particles. So we say in quantum physics, it's instantaneous, the entanglement. But that's just because it's so fucking fast that we can't measure it, right?
So it's actually not instantaneous. It's just really fast.
No. And if the universe was connected that way and the refresh rate was at the speed of light, the universe would fall apart because it would take billions of years for information to go from one side of the universe to the other. The states of every particle in the universe must be known so that all the other particles can be in the appropriate relationship of states, right? So at the speed of light, it cannot happen, but at the speed, so I calculated at the speed of the sub-Planck, how fast would a bit of information go from this side of the universe to the other side of the universe. So it has to do with the size of the universe and the speed of the sub-Planck as it goes through the network of all the protons, right? So I calculated that, and it gave me 10 to the minus 23 seconds to go from one side of the universe, like 0.000230 zeros of a second, right? It's super fast, right? To go across the universe. And that just, okay, this is the part where my brain just got splattered all over the wall. That I recognized that number when I saw that number. It just happens to be exactly how long it takes one proton to do one turn.
Damn.
For the oscillator to do, every time the oscillator does one turn, the universe has been updated about the state of
one complete spin.
One complete spin. All the rest of the oscillators in the universe has been, updated on the state of that. And so everything is continuously in relationship that way. And it's like you start to see it's like gear ratios.
Yeah.
It's like gears structuring the structure of space, but in a completely non-linear way.
So I'm curious what you think about this, because obviously that's incredibly mind-blowing. And if we're all made of the same thing the universe is made out of, I'm curious about what your thoughts are having access to non-local information and allowing knowledge to emerge from within us. like the Hermetic principle of as above, so below, as within, so without.
Exactly.
It kind of points to this.
That all starts to make sense,
Right.
but very rigorously.
Right.
You know, when it's no longer a philosophy, when it's rigorous, then it's really giving you all the details, the mechanics on how it works. It's very, very powerful. As well for engineering, because now you can make, warp drives, you can make energy anywhere you are.
Go to Jupiter for the weekend. Like
go
you
to
said.
the Jupiter for the weekend will change
That
your
sounds
consciousness.
very, very romantic.
No, it's powerful, as well. Yeah. I mean, looking at Earth in your bedroom, from Jupiter would be a nice, scenic view. And so, or you can levitate your habitat, just at the right synchronous orbit, so that you have sunset in your living room all the time, or sunrise. And so all of a sudden, society changed dramatically. But yeah, like you were saying, like these ancient principles that, since we're made out of that stuff, it might have emerged instinctively from us. Never mind that the ancients told the world in all of their cultures, we didn't came up with this. People that came from the stars came and told us this, sun gods that came from the universe.
Sirius B,
yes,
from all over.
Yeah, from all over.
The Dogon tribe, like all these amazing, incredible ancient traditions and societies that had access to information that they couldn't have possibly come up with at the time.
Exactly. They knew that Sirius was a binary star system. They knew that Sirius B was like the heaviest material, which is true. It's white dwarf, and like they knew the orbit of Sirius B around Sirius A. I mean, it was like all these things is remarkable. There's no way we discovered this when we got telescopes big enough, way later.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a couple perspectives of like how that could be possible. One is that there is, a previous ancient civilization that had contact with alien beings or whatever, but also on we were just talking about if we have access to non-local information and the whole like you can calculate the acceleration and density of the universe within a single proton, and we're made up of protons, then I'm just curious, like how does this change our notion of human potential as these discoveries, and you're making them scientifically rigorous? What does it mean, and what potential implications does it have as to who we are and like what we are as human beings?
Well, you might start to consider that even the seat of your consciousness is actually coming from that source, right? That your knowledge and your creativity is actually emerging from that inner knowing. Right? That inner knowing. And if you look at the greatest scientists or sculptors or, artists and so on around the world in history, most of them said it was from within. I had like a gut feeling. And maybe a scientist like went after and tried to figure out the math for it, but they had the concept first. If you want to know the future, you look at, science fiction's movie. Because, all the technology we have today was in science fiction not so long ago, right? The cell phone, the refrigerator, the submarines, all this was like everything, the planes, the rockets, it was all in our inner knowing first. And then we figured out how to make it in the real world. So where is that coming from, right? So yeah, I truly believe that because the proton is entangled, that particles that make up your body are entangled to all of the rest of the universe, you have access to infinite amount of information, right? And I think the master that walked the earth, that told people, go within if you want to access the kingdom of heaven, I think they were really meaning heaven, like the universe is, and they said it in many cases, is within you. And I think they really meant it, like physically. The problem is the tendencies to extrapolate these notions to philosophy and try to actually separate from the material world in spirituality and see like some separation, where what I'm finding is that no, the material world is the source, right? So you have to integrate within, and within the material world, you have the tunnel to infinite amount of energy, infinite amount of knowledge.
I mean, you look at some of the greatest minds that have lived, from Nikola Tesla to Kurt Gödel to Einstein to Isaac Newton. A lot of them spent just as much time in their metaphysical practice of alchemy, that they wrote many papers about and in their journals about accessing that empty space within them and finding emptiness and going within and finding the kingdom of heaven. They found, a lot of them spoke to how their novel discoveries came by virtue of course, doing the work, studying your physics, doing that, and then forgetting it all, going into the silence and seeing what wants to emerge from within you. And it seems as though the more that we make space for that silence and to find stillness within ourselves, whether we're physicists at the forefront of novel discovery in that world, or we have a podcast, or we're an author and we're writing, like there is an emergent new version of what wants to come through us, I feel, all that we can tap into. And I just would love for you to continue to speak to that, because it opens up so many doors, and it's a theme we've explored many times in this podcast. By accessing kind of that 0 point and finding stillness within you, you gain access to something really incredible that is greater than you possibly could have intellectually conceived of.
Yeah, of course. Because like if you access this, all of a sudden you realize the infinite nature of your existence. The incredible potential that you hold, and the capacity to tap into sets of information that, there's a reason why, like, we did studies on remote viewing, and 80% of, they were plucking students off Berkeley, university, like right out of, the during lunch, and without training, trying to get them to remote view a place they never been to, and they got like something like 80% success and things like that. And they, like, how is that possible? Because the whole thing is entangled and the information is there, and it actually doesn't take very much training to actually have access to it. And the fact that you're conscious right now, it may be because this is exactly the evidence of the access to this information. Your consciousness is actually the feedback in the field of this information. And so, it starts to match really nicely. The difference is that if you have a rigorous mechanical understanding of it, you're going to be able to make it into your technology. You're going to be able to like apply it into your technology. Now, imagine that you have technology that now is able to like extract, that information in the material world. Now it's producing power just by sitting there, tapping in that same field that nature is doing every moment. It's common for physicists to tell people, and especially inventors that are working on these technologies, that it violates the laws of thermodynamics, and you can't do this, and there's no free lunch, and when is the last time the universe sent you a bill for the energy of all your atoms, right? Like, but that as well, that like there's no perpetual motion, right? But find me something that's not perpetual then. Okay? Actually, there's only perpetual motion. We have been looking at protons all the way back as far as we can see. We don't see one proton decay. Protons don't decay. They perpetually continue to oscillate and be their nice proton nature, right? And produce a charge and all this stuff. And that's remarkable. Okay? And so, it's like another perspective. Oh, it's like a change of perspective from a perspective of lack. There's, entropy, everything goes to the shits, eventually, to, oh, if there's disorder, is because there was order before. So there's a cycle of order.
Entropy going the other way.
Exactly. Yeah. And I can hook my technology, I can hook my consciousness and my technology to this natural cycle. And all of a sudden, I have a society that has infinite amount of energy that can travel through the solar system, if not the galaxy or even the universe. And it just changes the whole game. You realize you're not isolated and you're part of an energy dynamic that you can tap into it and use to infinity. It's like when you tap into the energy of a lake that has water going down through a turbine, right? A hydroelectric dam, right? You didn't put the water in the lake. You did, and the water falls through the turbine. It's called a gravitational potential. It falls into the turbine and you extract energy. And you calculate the entropy, or you calculate the inefficiency of your turbine, and you see it's not over unity. It's, I'm not able to remove all the gravitational potential. There's some disorder, right? The water doesn't turn the propeller exactly perfectly, right? But that's because you've made a box and isolated the system. You have the lake, the water going down the dam and going out, and you cut the box there. But that's not, the universe doesn't have that box. The universe, so blow the box away and then follow the water. And because the earth is spinning, because the sun is shining, because there are Coriolis forces, the water is evaporating and it's making clouds, and the clouds are going back north, right? And they're raining back into your lake, right? That's the centropy cycle, right? That closes the loop. And so this is continuously happening, and your little turbine, it is over unity. You're extracting energy from the universe. It gives it to you, right? Same thing in nuclear fission. The energy that is in the nuclei, you didn't put it there. You're just extracting energy that's already been put there by the universe. So this is just a way to realize, oh, actually, I don't have to extract the energy after it's made atoms. I can tap into the source of energy that makes the atom. And instead of breaking things apart and doing all this, high energy physics and trying to fuse atoms, or instead of like doing like crazy huge device that costs billions of dollars, I can just tickle the field. I can do, I can do just like, harmonic coupling to the field. I can play, I can dance with the field. I can make a little gradient of my own, right? Here.
In theory, right?
In theory and in practice.
Is it?
It was done.
It was done.
It was done.
Meaning accessing that infinite energy within a single point. How was it done?
It was done by many inventors throughout the ages, throughout like Tesla, Mori brothers before Tesla, and so on, and many other inventors.
Why is that not obviously? And I I could come up with my reasons why, but why is that not publicly known? Why is that not more of an
Stephen Greer did a good movie, The Lost Century, that you can find on Amazon. I think it's really a good historical documentary of all the inventors and what happened to them. Let's just say there's not been so much excitement about bringing these type of technologies to the public and to the market throughout the ages, throughout the last few decades.
And I really don't think that should surprise anybody with the understanding of, I mean, just like the pharmaceutical industry they profit off of keeping customers. It's kind of a sad reality that they don't as
If
much
they're
by
sick,
creating cures, right?
Yeah.
And similarly, the energy crisis, right? It's a $1 trillion industry, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that want to protect that.
Well, and I think when you look at zero-point energy history and you rigorously, it's hard to believe that it was missed that badly. You start to suspect that on purpose. I don't know if you saw the movie Oppenheimer. So they showed the history of the development of the bomb, of the atomic bomb, and at one point I was really proud of them. They say, we are going to extract the energy of the strong force. This is the force that's holding things together. But basically, it really is that, like, at the time, you start to suspect that they, on purpose, derailed away from zero-point energy for reasons that had some value at the time. We were talking the end of the Second World War, or, the middle of the Second World War, and like all kinds of issue with like racing to make a bomb, giving equations and understanding of physics that says there's an infinite amount of energy in the nuclei of the atom that could be tapped into, was maybe not, the thing they wanted to do to give to the enemies at the time, whether you're on one side or another. And so it might have got derailed for those reasons, security reasons at the time.
Right.
And then maybe it kept on being derailed. And how would you do that? You have control over what's being taught in the, academic structures. So you just train your physicist and you confuse them and you remove that part of the equations.
So, Nassim, many people in the scientific community, I think...
just one thing. You do that and you convince them to continue to repeat that it's impossible, even if it's there, it's impossible to extract energy from it. You continue to repeat that.
Right.
Where, in fact, the equation tells you, as we demonstrate, I mean, the mainstream didn't have the fact that it produced mass, but it clearly tells you that the oscillator is needing that energy to keep oscillating, and we prove that it's actually the source of mass. So it's all of reality is evidence that it's extracting that energy, right? And you have the Casimir effect, which is like two plates that get pushed together by the vacuum fluctuation, because you eliminate the long wavelength between the two plates. You make a little gradient and the plates get pushed. It's a little pressure. It's not much, but it's still energy extracting. To continue saying you can't extract energy from it is kind of ridiculous. We know, for instance, that it's producing the spontaneous emission of photons and nuclei and so on. So it really, like, it's really much more evidence that it is at the source of the material world than that it's a weird animal and you can ignore it because it all cancels out and you can't get any energy from it.
A quick share. When it comes to health, I feel it's a lot of the little things that add up. And for me, one of those little things is starting my day with AG1. AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that delivers daily nutrients and gut health support. And it's backed by multiple research studies so you can trust what you're putting in your body. Unlike so many other products, their entire formula is backed by research studies and not just the ingredients. And they've conducted a study with the key markers of high quality research, which is third party, double blind, and placebo controlled. The results from their published studies are aligned with what I've also personally noticed. For example, in one study, after 30 days, 97% of people felt more energy. And in another, after 90 days, 97% felt their digestion improve. So start with AG1 and notice the difference for yourself. It's a great first step to investing in your health. And that's why I'm so excited to be partnering with them. Try AG1 and get a free bottle of vitamin D3K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase at drinkag1.com/know thyself. That's a $48 value for free if you go to drinkag1.com/know thyself. Check it out. Link in the description as always. Back to the show. I think many within the scientific community, like I would just want to ask you, because I've actually met people or I've met someone who's said that they've created a free energy device, and there's many people out there. To what degree you think they have legitimacy or whatever is up for debate. I think there's probably a lot of kooks out there also.
There's a lot of goofy stuff.
Yeah.
And in many cases, it's people that are instinctively trying to do it.
Right.
And in many cases, they don't necessarily are trying to mislead people. They just confused about how they should make measurements and all this. They don't have enough technical knowledge to do it properly.
So you have personally seen like a free energy device in person?
But there is some, yes, that I personally verified that, it gets pretty easy when the device has no input power. So devices that have input power, it gets harder. But when they have zero input power, and they continuously output power.
Like, what's an example of a device that would do something like that with no input power? Like, what would using water? How, like hooking up to what?
No, many of them that are like that are static device. There's nothing moving.
Just something on a countertop, a device that's pulling energy from the 0 point.
Right. It's got a bunch of coils and they're oscillating and they're creating harmonic relationships together. They're basically spinning the structure of space-time a little bit in the region of space and extracting a little energy. It's making its own little smoothie, its own little, gradient.
If you've seen something like this and it actually exists out there, why I feel like it wouldn't be that hard to have somebody with this device and to verify its legitimacy on a platform where it's seen by millions of people and completely shift the scientific paradigm understanding of energy.
It seems so.
It seems so, right?
Yeah.
So like,
I would refer you back to what we saw happen in the last few years in relationship to some, strange, virus that, emerged supposedly because somebody ate a bat. Okay?
Yeah.
So what do you think when I saw that? I was like holding my head with my two hands thinking, okay, but I've studied a lot of biophysics. I'm not an expert in virology. I called my virologist friends and I asked, can you get SARS-2 from eating a bat? Because viruses that don't infect human cells don't just all of a sudden decide to infect them. So what would you think is the most likely possibility? Some miracle that SARS-2 all of a sudden decided to infect human cells because somebody ate a bat. I guess it was undercooked or something. Or down the street, the P4 lab that was working on gain-of-function research, publishing papers of how to use, SARS-2 to and change it so that it would be able to infect human cells. Which one? Which one you think is the highest probability? how long it took to like, and it's still today, there's debate about it. You know, I could get in trouble. I'm hoping I'm not getting your channel in trouble.
No, I mean, I think it's a thing that is actually like legitimately being considered on both sides. Like it's
yes, and I would just suggest that the probabilities are high.
Yeah.
That the P4 lab that's working on that is the source of this thing. So you see, it's if you have enough resources to stop certain sets of information from getting into the world. And on the other side, you have inventors that have zero resources, that are putting things together with, you know, barbed wire and duct tape and plywood, right? It's pretty easy to convince the rest of the scientific community they're all kooks, right? And in the kook, you know, in the like
dismissal of them,
and then you miss the jewels,
right?
In the system.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you more off air about this, and you know, I don't want to get too much into the weeds because there's a lot I still want to talk about. But
yeah, and it'll get me in trouble. I'm already in trouble.
No, we got to keep you safe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we'll try.
I also just want to go back because we referenced a lot of things that I would like to touch on. One, we live in a scientific world, a Cartesian way of kind of putting things in conceptual boxes where the material reductionists have really divorced from having intrinsic kind of spiritual experiences where they feel their interconnectedness. You know, I think if a lot of these materialists had maybe an experience with a psychedelic or a meditative experience, they might be open to considering these other realities. I've experienced, you know, like you were mentioning with the remote viewing. I think when you have either an internal experience or you really validate through like this one time, however it sounds, I had a call with a psychic. Okay, say what you want about psychics. That girl said to me things that nobody could possibly know. Okay,
right.
And so to me,
because you have access to all information.
Right. But she wouldn't have physical access on the web or talking to people. Like there's just no way. And so she must have access to connection to the web to some degree. So putting all of that
to the universal web.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the universal web, not www.
Yeah.
So with all that being said, I want to explore your understanding of the nature of consciousness, because we've been having more conversations on recently this show around exploring panpsychism, idealism, different types of monism, and understanding what is the nature of consciousness and how it plays with everything that we're speaking to. And so we talked about how the information of the whole is within the part. We are a conscious being that has awareness of itself and can access these different information points on the web, so to speak. So what do you think is the nature of consciousness? Do you believe it's a fundamental constituent of the universe?
Yeah, you know, it's funny, like 30 years ago when I was starting to present in physics conferences, it was, you could say the F word, but you could not say the C word. Like you couldn't talk about consciousness. It was thought to be unscientific to talk about consciousness. No physicist that was a respectable physicist was talking about consciousness. And now it's kind of flipped on its head. And, you know, it's kind of the cool thing for physicists to talk about consciousness and to explore where consciousness is coming from and all this. And so you get all these statements coming out, even from the mouth of physicists, saying, you know, I believe that consciousness is the source of everything, and then like everything emerged from consciousness. And I'm really not a big proponent of these theories, because they are replacing the word God with consciousness, or the word Big Bang with consciousness, right? It's like, oh, it all came out of consciousness. But what is that?
Right.
What is consciousness? If you're not giving me the mechanics of how consciousness made all the atoms, then I'm not more advanced than some cult, right?
Right.
So I'm not interested in these type of statements. If you're gonna say consciousness, then you better define what that is. And in the context of this field of information that's creating coherency and scaling from this fundamental pulse up the pulses to eventually the frequency of, for instance, the microtubules in the brain. And I just finished that part. It's unpublished. It's very exciting. It gives all the right answers for like the carbon atom, the benzene ring, and like the microtubule and all this. And so if that's true, then consciousness is an emergent, like what we call human consciousness is actually an emergent phenomena at the end of the feedback loop of information, because being aware, and so I'd rather use the word awareness than consciousness. Being aware of yourself means that you have understood the feedback that you're seeing in the mirror, for instance, that is you, right? So you're aware of self, right? Now that, I believe, is the, ultimate part of consciousness, but that consciousness is there all along. I was really proud of this statement that was signed by all these amazing neuro scientists in the last 6 months that declared that they have enough data now to show that all animals have at least some levels of consciousness, including insects and everything. And because the data is showing that they do things for fun, right? Anybody that has a dog could have told you that. But the fact that the human society is now declaring this officially, that yes, animals have consciousness.
Dolphins will suck on a pufferfish to get high in the ocean.
That's right.
There's many different examples of this.
Yeah, basically, even bees, they can see in insect that they do things for the enjoyment of it, and that so that there's a certain level of awareness. They're not just doing things to feed themselves or replicate and so on. It's not mechanical. They actually enjoy their time as well. Is making the scientific community say, okay, so there's a certain level of consciousness all along. And what I'm saying is that actually extends, and that the scientific community is not there yet because I haven't given them the equations, but that's on its way. It extends all the way down to the Planck field. That is the pulse of that information set. And so, like, the material world is actually as well, part of this feedback of information, getting more and more complex, getting more and more advanced, and making things that are less advanced at first, and then more and more advanced eventually to a human being that is, highly, has high enough complexity that it become aware of itself.
So you're speaking to consciousness as essentially a force that runs upon all scales, but there's a point in which it becomes aware of itself, which only certain
levels of complexity and density of systems can achieve. Right?
So in a way, from like the metaphysical or philosophical understanding, like I am runs throughout all existence. I am that I am, or awareness of awareness, essentially, is for certain levels of development within human or other life that can recognize self in a mirror, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's, man, when you explore the different ways in which qualia shows up in different life forms, for example, an octopus or a mantis shrimp that has 12 different channels of color, right? And these different ways in which people, different things within existence are having an experience of itself is very very fascinating. And it just starts to push our boundaries and scope of understanding of what we think life is and what's possible within life, right? Because
Yeah, it's not necessarily accurate to say that only the human species has become aware of itself.
no, for sure, there's a lot
Yeah,
of other animals that can recognize itself in a mirror,
that's right.
and apes, and
Yeah, well, there's more and more evidence of that. Yeah, I mean, certainly with dolphins, it's been demonstrated. I don't know what exactly the state is of that type of studies are, because it's not my field of expertise. But I would suggest that it's like it's like a gradient of change. Like it's like an evolution of the material world. I mean, really, when you look at us, we're like water bags with a bunch of minerals in it that have self-organized, that vortexed itself into a self-organized system that is transferring information and acting upon it, right? Like it's really a remarkable thing. But it takes the whole scale from atomic or subatomic particle or even Planck scale all the way to the biological scale for the whole thing to work together. And so that's why I make a little bit of fun of the neurologists that look at the brain and try to find the seat of consciousness in the brain by analyzing chemical change in the brain and saying it's not quantum because the brain is too warm and too wet. It can't be quantum. It must be at the biological scale. And I just say to that, well, like it would be like an astrophysicist that's looking at a galaxy, analyzing a galaxy, and that ignores the stars in it because they're too far remote in terms of size to the galactic disk. Well, if you're going to ignore the stars, you're going to miss the whole thing, right? The cells of your brain and everything you're made of is made out of atoms. And at the atomic level, the energy levels are much higher. And this is where we need to look if we want to understand the nature of the information network that we see at larger scale that are developed from the atomic structure. So you see, I get into a lot of trouble in many ways. And I love, what there's so many brilliant people. People are so brilliant. It's amazing. It's just that the educational system has a tendency to really like fracture and compartmentalize studies so that the person that studied the molecular structure ignores the atomic structure. The person that studied the atomic structure ignores the molecular or the biological structure. Like this is, it's the problem. There's like all this fragmentation of our science, and then it doesn't speak across the scale anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you think everything in the universe is an equation of sorts? Like everything is essentially mathematical in the way that if you're looking to build towards a unified theory of everything, is that possible within, I guess, the limited, even though we could, like you spoke to, contain information from the whole within the part, within the system, is it possible to gain awareness through an equation with a theory of everything that explains the whole outside of the system? I feel like, and it's been talked about how you may have to be outside of the system fully to be able to understand what it is, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So you think it's possible to have a theory of everything? Is that possible in your eyes?
I think so, absolutely. I think that like it's actually inevitable.
Inevitable. It's inevitable in the fact that it will
Inevitable.
come.
Yes, sorry,
Uh-huh.
my English.
No, you're good.
Now that I live in France and speak French a lot, my English is going. It's not good. I got to train, but I think it's a natural consequence of what's going to happen. I want to rectify your statement a little bit. mathematical physicists, which most physicists that are doing fundamental physics today are mathematical physicists. And what I mean by that, they mostly do mathematics, and they don't necessarily relate it well to physics, meaning like the real shit that's happening in the real world, right? These books that are published called Lost in Math, and things like that, because they're in like 11 dimensions of strings and, 10 to the 500 compactification, possibility when, reality is most likely vastly different from that. But so there's this saying that you hear physicists and mathematical or mathematician even say is the universe is mathematical in nature. There's famous people that said that in history, and we keep repeating that. And I disagree with that. I disagree fundamentally with that. I think the universe doesn't do mathematics. It doesn't really care, what the humans with their Greek letters are writing on a piece of paper. I don't think it builds using mathematics. What the universe does is geometry. Geometry is fundamental. And what I mean by geometry is ratios. It does ratios, relationship. It's all relationship. And the relationship produce the constants that we see, the forces that we see, the energy that we see. That it's all relationships. And when you look at the mathematics we write for the universe, we see these relationships, like the relationship between energy and mass, all the things we see in relationships. So ratios, geometry is what the universe does. And then the human have, made systems of mathematics with symbology, with like ways of describing things, models, to try to describe these relationships, to try to describe this geometry that the universe does. So I like to think of it more reverse. The universe is geometric in nature and relationships in nature, and we write mathematics to understand these relationships.
And I mean, we see this and we can observe throughout all of nature, throughout all the cosmos, how there's significant patterns and ratios that show up, like the number 108 in terms of how many moons fit between the Earth and the Moon, and how many Earths fit between the diameter of the Sun, and it goes on and on and on from the macro to the micro, and it is.
Yeah, we see geometry, we see ratios that are very sustained across different scales. We see, for instance, the golden ratio, show up, or the Fibonacci series would be more accurate, show up in many different scales in our universe, from galaxy arms to, flowers on our planet and so on. And so it's like, yeah, they seem to be repeating ratios, fractal kind of things, the way things divide and the ratio the universe used to make these divisions. You can see that there's some kind of coherent pattern that is developed by nature. And that was how I started my exploration when I was young. It's like, I want to understand this pattern. And then I thought, if I can write the math of this pattern, I should find all of the fundamental constants we measure in physics. And I did. It's not published yet. That's in the third paper. The paper I just published is a series of 3. And so it will come. But we measure the gravitational constant, we measure the Rydberg constant, we measure alpha, we measure all these things that we call fundamental constants of physics, but we don't know where they come from, right? Well, when you do these ratios and you understand how this fundamental field creates relationship, then you find these constants emerge naturally from these from these theories. So it's very powerful because now you understand how these constants and what are the mechanics of these constants.
I think so many of us get awestruck just glancing at the inherent intelligence that's weaved throughout all of creation, like the finely attuned ratios that hold everything in balance just right. If it was off just a little bit on one way or the other, it wouldn't come to be.
Yeah, it's called the fine-tuning problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that
like there would be none of planets, stars, galaxies if alpha was a little bit off or G was a little bit off, like by very little, and then nothing would have come together. Yeah. So it's highly tuned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have a moment? Because I think a lot of us are just awestruck at the sheer level of intelligence and organization between the coherent universe. But you in your early 20s, like, was there an experience or what kicked you off down this path initially? I'm just curious for your personal journey, because for you to devote your life to this, I would only assume that it was either a fundamental drive and passion that was just within you for a while, or maybe you had a series of experiences that really motivated you down this path.
No, it's both. I had moments of, deep knowing and illuminations that got me on this path, but as well a bunch of different circumstances that like made it so that I was thinking about this really profoundly. I was like spending significant amount of time meditating on the nature of this, of all these relationships. What is the fundamental geometry of this thing?
Why? Why were you doing that? Why were you meditating on that?
Because I wanted to know, like, how did I get here? I was kind of surprised that people weren't asking that question.
Yeah.
It seemed like we just get here and then we get told this is what you do, right? You go to school, right? As soon as like you can barely walk, you get stuck in this institution and you just sit down and we're going to teach you all this stuff. And so then you learn. And then as soon as you get out, now you got to get a job, you got to get married, you got to get the house, get the car, and it's like, and I was awestruck when I remember having these thoughts when I was like 7 or 8, thinking, why are we doing all this? Like, where is it going? Like, and nobody was asking that. How did I get here? What is this? Like, what is this experience I'm having? Like, like very fundamentally. And I was really strange. And then I realized, oh yeah, they do ask that question. Typically, like hours before they pass, hours before they pass, they go, what was this whole experience I just had of 80 years or whatever, but it's like now you got hours to figure it out. So I figure I better start asking the question early because I might need a lot of time to figure it out. And I sure did, I needed a lot of time. And I think I'm getting really close. But the remarkable thing is that there's always deeper levels, and every time, like, you get completely transformed when you discover deeper levels of the amazing coordination and like 1/3 of the proton is the universe refresh rate, and things like that. It really when it's not just an equation, it's not just a concept. It's like, oh, you can start to feel it in your body. When it's really true, you can start to feel it in your body. It's in your awareness. Like you can start to feel your relationship with this field, and it's powerful. It's transformative. And my conclusion is that the universe is learning about itself, and we're the probes at the end. Einstein said, objects are not in space. Objects are an extension of the space, right? And he was saying that because he was talking about the fact that space is not empty, the 0 point energy and all this. And he said, like, as a consequence, we can't think of space as empty. Space is full, and it's the source of how an object emerge. How things emerge. Like, to start to think that way, I think Einstein was definitely on it.
Mm-hmm.
And you might say, well, why didn't Einstein? He was a smart guy, right? Like, why didn't he unify the field then? Well, he didn't have the tools. He was missing some stuff. One of the things he was missing the most was what his theory predicted, meaning his theory of general relativity predicts black holes. In fact, it doesn't predict anything else than black holes, right? The solution to Einstein field equation is a black hole. It's a Schwarzschild solution, but he didn't believe they existed.
So I am very fascinated at how the unique things in life that bring us joy and excite us to move and discover different fields of study. It almost feels like there's this divine orchestration that draws us to, on one hand, these discoveries as we start to make space for what wants to emerge from within us, but also who we become on the process of doing the work in the world is I feel like the real fruit of the path. And you mentioned that you've had, alongside your study and field of work, transformative experiences, both in the realization of the profundity of what you're discovering, but also, firsthand experiences that felt transformative. And when you look back on that time, would you care to share one or two of those pivotal moments where you had an experience that you feel like really transformed you?
Well, I mean, one of the most known one that I've discussed in many of my lectures is when I was approximately 10 years old. I don't know exactly, but it was around there. I got my first lesson in geometry, and I had a very similar experience than Buckminster Fuller had prior to me, which was, the teacher made a dot on the blackboard and said that's dimension 0, and it doesn't have volume and doesn't exist. And I thought, I'm gonna fail this class. I know I'm gonna fail this class because I see the dot. So if I see the dot, it's got some volume. If I look at the chalk on the blackboard with an electron microscope, it's got volume. So what do you mean it doesn't exist? You mean the concept of the dot doesn't exist? So you see this extrapolation from an analogy. We make analogies, and we assume that because we made an analogy, it's the way the universe works is the error, right? And so then the bunch of dot makes the line that makes dimension 1. The 4 line makes a plane that makes the dimension 2, and then the 6 planes get put together to make a cube that makes dimension 3. That I was more and more confused, because if the dot didn't exist and the line doesn't exist, then the plane cannot exist because it's defined by 4 lines, and then if the plane doesn't exist, well, you haven't enclosed anything when you've made a cube with non-existing planes. You just got non-existence to the fourth, and so it's like, this cannot be it. Like, how do I solve that riddle? And going home, I had like an hour-long bus ride because I was not doing well at school. I was very dyslexic, and I kept on, having to be transferred to other schools, further and further from my house. And so I had an hour and a half bus ride coming home. And so I was thinking about this in the bus, and I realized, actually, the only way you can solve this is by saying the exact contrary. The only thing that exists is the dot, the singularity, and that singularity can be divided to infinity. So I didn't know to use the word fractal. I didn't know about Cantor that had come up with infinite amount of infinities. I didn't know all these things, but I was starting to think the universe must have like I was thinking, wow, the cells are so small, and then the atoms are so small, and then the subatomic particles are so small. And I was thinking, oh, this solar system is so small relative to the galaxy, and the galaxy is so small relative to the cluster, and the cluster to the supercluster, and the supercluster in the universe, and our universe could be in a larger one. And and I started to think, oh, okay, it's like all dots at different scales that have different levels of complexity in them, different energy levels at all the scales. And that really, I mean, was really close to what I'm writing right now. And that was at the age of 10, right? So this is 50 years ago. And and it really launched me to try to understand the fractal nature of space, to try to understand, the relationship between the scale, the energy transfer from one scale to the other, and all this, and eventually, but it was a profound moment because at the same time, when I was turning 11, I learned to meditate, and I realized, oh, okay, meditation is like looking inwards instead of looking outwards all the time, taking some time and inward, if you try to imagine infinity outward, it's like you run out of bits, like it's too much. You can't like take it all in. But if you actually start to think of infinity as like divisions within you, then you get a sense of infinite amount of infinities, like Cantor described. You get a sense of this fractal nature within. So infinitely small is the way you want to go if you're trying to like reach singularity within. So those had impact. I have many other stories. I mean, times I was a mountain guide, I was a ski guide, I was, and times in the mountains that were like profound moments of, just spontaneous moments of feeling complete connectivity with my environment, with the natural world around me, of feeling of deep knowledge, pouring in, like very profound moments that left me completely changed and transformed. Yeah. So I mean, so many of these moments when doing exercises, for instance, like getting in the zone, right? So for instance, I was a solo climber. So I love to solo climb, and I would go up thousands of feet, no ropes, just shoes and chalk. And it was like looking at the crystals in the rock as I was climbing, and the, beautiful level of zoning into the field and having the most amazing time and finding the edge, between fear and complete ecstasy, right? Like it's because in these state where like one error is the end, right? You have this, you find that edge so clearly between fear and ecstasy, and it's so nice. You get so clear feedback, in this case in climbing, because as you're climbing, if you start having thoughts, you're going to fall. If you look down and start thinking you're going to fall, it's almost instantaneous. I feel it right now talking about. It's almost instantaneous. Your hands and your palm of your hand starts to get wet. You start sweating. It's almost instantaneous. And so more you're afraid, more you're sweating, more you're slipping.
Yeah.
And it's just a bad feedback, right?
Yeah.
It's not looking good for you.
Yeah.
And you have to overcome the fear thoughts and think, oh, I'm having a beautiful day. It's gorgeous. I'm gonna be at the top enjoying this. And and then as soon as you overcome the fear, boom, you're back in and you're fine and you keep going, right? So these were moments that were important for me because I was terrified to do this work. I mean, I wasn't terrified to do the work because I was so, and I am still so passionate about it. But at the time, I was definitely terrified to try to bring it to the world. Like I knew I was going to get tomatoes thrown at me one after the other. And, what was going to that do to my self-esteem, to my feeling of security of self. Like I had many reasons to be afraid. And at the same time, I felt it was my duty to bring this knowledge to the world. And I had to be okay with enduring and that those things would make me grow, And I've grown. I'm so much better now at receiving criticism. Um, mm, and it's still hard. It hurts your heart, especially if it's, unjustified. If somebody looks at my equation and says, okay, this term here is false, or it's wrong, or this equation is false, or you have to fix this, or that, thank God, thank you for telling me, or let me work this out. But when it's like you're an idiot, or like you're a crackpot, like then it hurts. And it's not so much what they're saying about me that hurts, is when I see people that were interested get diverted because they heard something from somebody that had nothing to do with the physics, then it hurts my heart that person was interested and now thinks I'm a crackpot because they read it on some thread, on Reddit or whatever, And that's painful to see. Yeah.
Have you found any comfort in the observation that some of the greatest thinkers in the past that have brought forth novel discovery that were a paradigm shift for the planet were all notoriously hated or shunned or almost killed?
Called crackpots and not just almost killed.
Yeah,
many were killed. So it helps. It doesn't make it much better because it's still painful in the moment, but it helps. You go, at least they're not burning me at the stake or cutting my ear off, or like I can, so it's not as violent as it used to be, but it's still painful. Yeah.
I'm curious because we're here. I want to ask you, because there are many in the scientific community that kind of cringe at this, what they feel is an unjustified leap from examining this quantum strangeness to macroscopic effects like manifestation, and they feel like there's some hand waving or like where it's just unjustified in the explanation of saying because we're all interconnected at this quantum level where things are strange, to then say that there's these more, I guess, denser realities like manifestation that operate. I'm just curious what your thoughts on that are, both the criticism, but then also if you care to share the literal mechanisms of how that works.
Yeah, I mean, that's a complex issue, and it has to do with the fact that the hand waving doesn't come from the people that are saying these things, although they're doing some hand waving too. It actually as well come from the way the Copenhagen interpretation of the double slit experiment occurred, like this idea of the measurement and the collapse of the wave function and all this. That has quite a bit of hand waving in it. And I'm not sure what they were smoking in Copenhagen, but like to think that the cat is alive and dead at the same time, which is what Schrödinger came up with to ridiculize the interpretation of his own equation, showing that like, no, this is gotta be an error. And then it got it got popularized, like to his horror, right? That, oh yeah, this is the way it works, Well, it's I think bad science. I think it's really bad science, and that really is the problem. Because and it's the reason it's complex, because the spiritual people look at that and say, oh, you see, you need consciousness to make a measurement for the collapse of the wave function to happen and reality to emerge. And so that means consciousness is primary and da 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 da. And so like they take off with this, when I think the principle in its inception is false, right? So why was it interpreted this way? Well, I'm going to tell you. Because they removed zero-point energy, because they removed the field. So let me explain. You have an experiment where you have one slit and you're throwing things at it. You're throwing photons or, electrons at it. And you're getting dots on the backboard because it's going through the slit and making dots. And then you put two slits, and then all of a sudden, instead of getting dots on both sides, you're getting an interference pattern on the backboard. And you go, oh, wow, the particle, instead of thinking, okay, we missed something, you start to think that the particle is splitting itself into two in state of superposition, and it actually interfere with itself after it's gone through the slit and making the interference pattern. And it's like, okay, what have you smoked, right? And then you try to measure which slit did it go through, right? To see if you got the right interpretation. And when you try to measure, you get a third result. And then you say...
Just through the mere observation and measurement of that.
Right.
And it changes it.
It changes it. But, and you start writing physics on that. But you could have interpreted this completely differently, except you couldn't have if you think that the particle you're shooting at the slit is isolated from the field, right? So if you think the particle is in a field-free environment, you've got a problem. And it will result into this interpretation. But now put the field back in. Put the 0 point back in, and realize that what you're shooting is actually like a dynamic of a field that's making waves as it moves, just like a boat makes waves on the ocean. So now it's a particle in a wave, not because it's in some kind of magical quantum state. It's just the mechanics of fluid dynamics of a field. Right? And so when you have one slit, it makes dot. When you have two slit, the waves that the particle made goes through the second slit, interfere and makes interference pattern. And then when you put an instrument to measure, that instrument is making waves as well. And it's canceling the wave of the particle that makes a third result. Right?
Just because of the particles that are emanating from the physical instrument that's making the observation, or in what way is it interfering within the wave?
I mean, you're using photon, whatever you're using to measure, right? You have to tune it to the harmonic frequency of your experiment. It's not just any measurement device. Yeah. And when you do that, you're basically canceling the waveform that the particle is making in the field. So, of course, you're getting a different result. But it's just because it's field interaction. This is called pilot wave theory. So I came up with it in my van on my own in the 90s, isolated in the mountains, being my climber self. And I thought, oh, I figured it out. And then it's like, no, somebody figured that out long before you, right? De Broglie and others, Bohm, eventually.
It's a big bummer. It's like
Yeah.
when you make a song on piano and you realize you just wrote like a big hit that's already out there.
That's already out there. Yeah, exactly. And I was like, no, but I was glad they had figured it out
Yeah.
because then eventually MIT in the 90s took a bag of fluid. It was silicone fluid with silicone beads, oscillated the back, and then shot the beads at the slit and got all the same result as the Copenhagen interpretation, but just with fluid dynamics. Right? Just with fluid dynamics. And then they took the back and they spun it. And then all the beads fell in the troughs and made like the quantum states, and so on. And it's like, wow, you can do the whole thing in fluid dynamics. And then you realize, wow, and the spiritual people might say, oh, but you're taking the magic away. And so people don't like that. So they continue with the Copenhagen interpretation. And it's like, no. It's much more profound. I'm actually putting the magic in. It's more profound. It's saying that everything is interacting, mediated by this field. Everything is producing reality by the mediation with this field. Everything is in relationship with everything else. You can't assume that it's isolated. It's all in connection. Everything together makes the collective experience we're having. So it's actually much more profound, and I think it's much more correct. And to rigorously write this, which we have, and it's in the second paper, it's coming out.
When is that coming out? Do you know?
We're trying to get it out. We were trying to get it out for the beginning of the year. I have feelings that's not going to happen. Hopefully by February or, February, May, or whatever.
Okay.
But, we can see that like where the errors were made, because you remove 0-point energy and everything goes sideways. You remove the field, and now you're gonna see things that you can't understand. And Einstein used to make fun of it. I think he was talking to Gödel when he said, do you really believe that when you're not looking at the moon, it's not there, right? Like,
local realism.
Yeah. It's not, the universe is not requiring the humans for it to exist. If a tree falls in the forest, it makes a noise. And it doesn't care if there's a human around to listen to it. There's all kinds of other things listening to it. The bugs, the fleas on the cat. The flea on the cat inside the box, the Schrödinger box, is not confused. The universe is not confused about the state of the cat. Just the human is confused about the state of the cat. Now, so, there's uncertainties, but it's only uncertainties because we're observing from our perspective. The universe itself is not uncertain about its state.
It can get a little bit into the weeds in terms of what you think something actually is and how it exists, independent of your own observation.
Well, it's just that the universe is not human-centric.
Of course.
It really isn't.
Which is the biggest, I think there's a saying that enlightenment is the biggest bummer to the ego or something. It's like, we want to be the center of the universe,
right. Well, that's the thing. It's like when you reach higher levels of awareness, you can become, a master, which you are, okay? And the ego can take off and go sideways. But if you're truly a master, um, you're quite aware that everybody's a master as well, because everybody has all the information. You're not actually teaching anything to anybody. You're just helping them to remember what they already know.
Yeah, like Gandhi said, to a pure heart, all hearts are pure. And similarly, a bodhisattva, someone who's awakened to their true nature, sees that as everyone else as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Buddha was asked, well, Buddha, you keep saying everybody is the Buddha, but we don't feel like the Buddha. Like, what's the difference between us and you if we're all Buddhas? And the Buddha answered, the Buddha knows it's the Buddha. It's the only difference, right? If you don't know you're the master, you're not the master. It's that straightforward. The problem is the ego has a problem. Don't think you're the master, because that would be a big ego tripping thing. The ego is a problem with that. But if knowing you're the master is knowing that everybody has mastery, everybody is a master, then you're good, right?
Mhm.
We're all good, right? See, that's the important thing.
What do you see as all this is progressing in the scientific work, science and spirituality merging? What do you feel is the reality of what that is and what it looks like in the coming decades?
So I think there's a really bright future for humanity if we are able to bring this level of information out. I think the next few decades, or even less, we're going to see energy extraction from vacuum fluctuation come into the world. We have to. This is the last tick on the 11th hour. We have to bring this new level of energy production into the world. I think it's very much on the way. And I think it's going to change fundamentally our society when you can make energy anywhere you are. But even, like not centralized. Eventually, like, your phone is going to make its own energy it needs to run. Your house is going to make its own energy that it needs to run. Like, it has little device in there that's extracting energy from the vacuum. Your car is going to do the same thing. Your spaceship is going to do the same thing, whatever. So I see a really bright future that can develop for humanity if it's allowed to happen, if it's allowed to come out, if it's and I think these type of technology, they transcend your consciousness. They help your consciousness because you realize, wow, I live in an abundant universe with infinite amount of resources. I have never to worry about feeding myself, lodging myself, having power, that like all humans can have everything they need. That there's infinite amount of resources. If you have gravity control, for instance, you can go and get chunks of gold the size of, asteroids. You go in the asteroid belt, you find everything you need, like water, all the material you need. And so it really, I think there's like a beautiful chapter for human beings, but it's like the surface of a balloon when you put energy into it, right? It starts going more and more high frequency as more and more energy you put into it, and then it goes into like chaotic pattern, and it looks like it's gonna rip apart right before it pops into the next resonant frequency at a higher frequency, and then it coheres again. Like, I think we're like in that phase where it's like super chaotic, and if the surface tension of the balloon is not strong enough, it can rip apart in that phase before it goes to the higher frequency. I think we're in that place where it could rip apart. It could, or it could transcend the little difficulty and, go to the next level, which would benefit all human beings on the planet.
Incredible. I think that alongside the external manifestations of gravity control or free energy, or who knows, especially what's possible as AGI superpowers us to be able to examine and do research into all these different things like protein folding, for example, or whatever. To sidebar that conversation, what do you think, not just in what we create, but in terms of how we understand who we are, like understanding ourselves, what do you think is going to be shifting there in the coming couple decades?
Well, the reason I talked about technology is because I think the technology is going to help us do that. Every astronaut that's gone to space has reported really transformative experience looking back at the Earth, seeing that there's no lines between countries, you know, that, you know, we're on a small little blue thing, that we're so fragile, that we're all humans, you know, they all had these reporting these experiences from seeing the Earth from orbit. Imagine everybody having access to that. It would change our, you know, our awareness. I mean, think of it this way. Like the problems of Earth become really minimal when you're orbiting Jupiter. You know, Earth is way over there. You're doing just fine. You have, you know, all the energy you need. You have everything you need. So what I'm saying is, okay, but before that, you know, just the fact that if this is allowed to happen, if this comes to be, it's going to change profoundly the way we think of ourselves. We're going to, like, profoundly, like, okay, I'm here, I'm having an experience, and this experience is linked to like a deep well of information, and I'm part of something so much greater than myself, right? And I'm part of this collective, you know, learning of creation of the universe and so on. And so I think we're gonna learn in the next few decades if the balloon doesn't rip and explode, right? If it actually makes it to the next level, you know, the sense of community, the sense of oneness with each other, the sense of collective, you know, constructive behavior that emerge, you know, from understanding deeper that we're all connected through this field. I think it's going to really transform our sense. I think that our true mastery will be allowed to come out, you know, and that's going to be beautiful to see.
You mentioned a lot of those external technologies, but it seems like just on the same parallel as these, the understanding of the external world is happening, we're seeing the fundamental parts in which it's made out of, which we are also made out of. And so I'm just curious to see what shifts in terms of our understanding of human potential and what becomes normal, or realizing what's actually natural within us, because we live in a world right now that is in so many toxic ways kind of pushing down the human potential. And I'm just interested to see as that blossoms, and almost as the field of belief kind of lifts, and like the veil of forgetting of the power that we have within us kind of lifts, what starts to awaken both in the powers of being human as energetic beings, and then everything that we create from it.
We kind of like see it emerging right now, you know, like the balloon example.
Yeah.
Before it pops into the next one, you see islands of coherency start to show up on the surface of the at the next frequency, right? At the higher frequency, islands of coherency starts to appear. I think these islands of coherencies are emerging. We see it. We see so many amazing humans doing amazing things.
Yeah, and also the organization of those humans coming together.
Exactly. And, you know, the piece that's largely missing, though, is the piece that produced the most fear in people, and it's the financial piece that, like, needs to plug in to, like, power this whole thing into the next, you know, like, CERN burns $1.5 billion a year in their budget. If a very small portion of that was distributed again, to laboratories that are working on understanding zero-point energy and bringing zero-point energy technology to the market and all this, we would pull out of that. We would pull out of the problems we have today very rapidly. So it's the willingness, the collective willingness, and we're starting to see it more and more, to actually take action and launch humanity in another direction. And then we need the financial structures to come behind and, fuel that so that it can take off. And that's the part that's harder. If you look at all these inventors throughout history that didn't succeed, in most cases, it's because the financial structure was not there to support them to get it out to the world, right? If they had the resources, maybe they would have done better. So it's problematic because, for instance, let's say you have an inventor that has this kind of technology, or that has needs resources to develop this kind of technology, and they go to an investor group or whatever, an individual, and so on. That person, that investor group or individual, has to take this information and turn around and try to do diligence on it and find and see if is this real? Is this possible? And if this was, let's go back to the Wright brothers, if this was the Wright brothers 2 weeks prior for them to get it done, right? Well, they would have said, oh, no, look, there's hundreds of papers saying it's not possible.
Yeah.
No. So then that individual with the resources, they have to have enough trust in their inner beliefs against all the experts saying, no, this is not possible, right? So it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge. And it has defeated us so far.
Yeah.
So, but there's more and more people that have resources that are as well, realizing and evolving and understanding these deeper principles that are in the Hermetic science and in the spiritual science and so on, and that are and that recognize the truth in this type of information, this type of science, and that wants to support. So hopefully that gets the job done.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my prayer is that the connections that are made individually, but then also collectively through platforms like this and the conversations that I see you be having more and more, start to ignite that possibility within people, and to start feeling as leadership starts to emerge in a new paradigm, where the people who are going against the grain of the current paradigm always look crazy, but then a discovery happens or something shifts where then the energy towards that leader who had more faith, I think Helen Keller is famously quoted about the one thing worse than having no sight is having no vision,
Yes, that's for sure.
So
yeah, that's a good quote.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look in history, all the people, most of the people that made great breakthroughs, and in science, there's not been that many. In physics, there's not been that many in the last 100 years. We're still pretty well where we were with Einstein and Planck and quantum mechanics and all this. There's been, of course, improvements on understandings of certain parts and bits and pieces, but no fundamental breakthrough, has occurred in physics in a very long time. And so, of course, you have, when it's been so long, it takes a lot of energy to like bring a breakthrough through, right? And so it takes time, and it takes patience. But what's most important is it takes resources to be able to do it. Those resources can be difficult to find, and it's really painful to see when you know what you could do, and all you need is like pennies, compare to
Right.
like what is being spent on
Yep.
other things that may not be so useful, like
Totally.
children dying, and military
Industrial complex. Yeah.
industrial complex and so on, like how to better kill each other. It's it can be quite difficult and frustrating.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah, man. Of course. I could literally talk to you for 8 hours and just keep going. We have an event here we're going to do here very shortly, so we got to hop off to that. But before we do that, there's just a couple more topics that I want to see if you can try to concisely share your thoughts on.
Yeah.
One,
I tried to be concise.
Yeah, I know.
But
I mean,
don't
it's
do
a hard
very well.
task.
Yes.
Okay, it's a very hard task.
Yeah.
And we can dive more into them in future conversations for sure. But when I think of the human story and whatever you want to say about ancient civilizations or whatever, recorded history or written history of whatever 6,000-ish, years back to ancient Sumeria, humanity in this context is a blink in the vast eternity of existence that has preceded us and will come through the descendants of humanity. And when I think about time, it is a very interesting concept to me because I've had various moments in meditative experiences where there's completely no sense of time, there's no sense of self. We live in a world that is ruled by the calendar and by time and being in places on time. And I've heard you speak to space memory, as like space time, and our understanding of time is being revolutionized, I think. And so what thoughts would you have on that in particular in relation to time being illusory or not even being possible without memory?
Right. So I changed space time to space memory because I feel that space memory is more precise, because no memory, no time. If you didn't remember the second before, you can't tell that there's an evolution of state, and so you can't say, there's a linear time because you don't remember what happened just before.
Would
right?
you not say that the time could still exist, though, irrespective of our experience of it? To the experience, I suppose, of other things.
I'm just talking about your experience just to give you an example. But the mechanics are the same for the universe outside of your experience of time, meaning that evolution in the universe, if it happens and we see it on our planet, it seems to happen, means that it has remembered what was before. So that information on the structure of space is the memory imprint. And at each coordinates, you get a memory imprint. Is like the still of a movie strip that you're playing, right? And it appears like linear time, but in fact, it's just stills, right? It's the same thing. Each point along the timeline is just an imprint in the coordinates in space of information. It's a memory of information as an imprint, just like memory on the hard disk. Okay? And so the Earth is spinning around the sun and the sun is moving through the galaxy. And basically, everything that's happening is leaving an imprint on the structure of space, on the 0 point energy, as it exchange information and produce all this. And memory, even in your memory, in your mind, is actually not in there. It's you accessing the information in the hard disk, what the ancient called the Akashic record of space, right? And so that time is really a concept of man, but actually the universe is just doing memory in coordinates in space. So yeah.
That's just mind blowing. And that was actually very concise. So thank you for
My pleasure
for that. Yeah, I want to unpack that more in the future with you for sure. Another thing that I just find mind blowing when looking into your work is this idea of nested realities or a multiverse. So if from the microcosm to the macrocosm, we observe how different parts emerge to grander wholes in this kind of complexity theory, it is reasonable to extrapolate that our universe could be one of many inside of a multiverse. And so I'm just curious what thoughts you have on the possibility of that.
Yeah, I don't like the terminology parallel universe, because they're not parallel. I don't think they're parallel. I think they're concentric to each other,
like nested within one another.
Nested, like Russian dolls.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly the scaling equations I'm writing show this. And the nesting is means that as well there is coupling from one scale to the other, right? The scale that's inside is influencing the larger scale, and the larger scale is influencing the scale. There's coupling across the scales, and so they're all interdependent on each other. And so I think that is most likely much more accurate of and it's really the thought I had when I was 10. And so I really truly believe that there is no size limit to the universe, to the multiverse, and that like the embeddedness can go to infinity, and that there's no size limit to how small the pixels of the universe can be. And so there's truly no size limit to the infinitely small. And so physicists would say, well, then how are you going to write physics on that? And it's because you can identify scales. Like, for instance, in our universe, you could say, I'm going to cut off at the Planck scale, right? And at the universal scale. And so now I'm going to understand what's in there. And since it's replicating like a fractal, if I understand one part, I will understand the whole. And that's how you end up studying the proton and figuring out the mass of the universe, right? And figuring out how the temperature of the universe, its angular momentum, its angular dynamics, and so on. So the reason I don't like parallel is because it's like if they were parallel, then they never connect. They're not in relationship with each other, where I think they're absolutely in relationship with each other. Yeah,
because everything's in relationship. So that would make sense.
Yeah.
It's just, I think our feeble human minds can't possibly comprehend what the universe is, let alone nested multiverse. But at the same time, I think there is a deeper intelligence than our own intellect. And I think that a lot of the great minds in the past have tuned into the intelligence that they're connected to around them to intuit these certain things, which then later are verified by science.
That's true.
And so any thoughts you have on the power of intuition and accessing that dimension within us as humans?
Yeah, I think, we've called intuition, and as almost a derogatory word, especially in science, like, oh, it's just what you think, it's just what you feel, it has no value. Where in fact, intuition is the most valuable. It's like the universe is talking to you, and are you listening, right? Because most of the greatest discoveries, and if you ask, if you look in history, is because somebody had an intuition and they intuited their way into it, and then went back and went, oh, okay, that's how I got to write the physics, right? You have to have the thought. And this is one of the errors that's occurring in physics in our era, is that we flip that on its head, and we now think that if you write enough mathematics, eventually it'll tell you how the universe works. And I think the best example of that is string theory, which leads you right into a wall, because the mathematics can, you can interpret it in all kinds of ways. And so I think that, like, it's much more important. And this is why Einstein said imagination is more important than facts. What he was leading to was, it has to come from within your knowledge. And that's intuition. That's your sense of, I have a sense it works this way. I have a sense it is this way, and then you go and verify if you got it right. And now it's got to be rigorous, right? But the sense, the intuition is critical. I mean, how many times did you have an intuition that you should turn left instead of turning right, and then met just the right person you needed to meet? And, like, when you follow your intuition, a lot of the times it works out best. So I think it's really the universe talking to you. It's really like you're tuning in to all of the different possibilities that are occurring in the universe, in your region of space, and you're actually feeling where is the most positive out behavior for you.
Yeah, it seems so pragmatic to me, honestly, that our bodies are able to follow a path and move in a direction where there's more coherence in ways that our mind can't fully understand. But we are an incredibly intelligent biological ecosystem that does have attunement and can follow those things. And so,
yeah, but what is it tuning to?
Right, the environment and the universe that is in your area of space and time, in a way. Yeah,
right. You're tuning into the field,
right,
and the field is talking to you.
Yeah, and that, to me, I love grounding this, because you have been throughout this whole conversation, and the reality of how it's actually working, and not just this hand-waving spiritual kind of pseudoscience-y talk, because it really just grounds it. So I appreciate you continuing to do that. Yeah.
I feel like it's critical.
It is.
And it's funny because it puts me at odds both with the spiritual community, which doesn't want to,
Right.
I don't, we don't need no stinking technology and, physics and all this. And, they're telling me that on their cell phone while driving their car. Or the scientific community that's saying, oh, you don't need no stinking consciousness, or, like awareness thing or intuition, just shut up and calculate, right? Which was a Feynman famous thing. And so I'm just, I think it's the one that thinks it's all internal to you and you don't need the exterior is just as wrong as the one that thinks it's all external to you and you don't need the interior. You need both. Both have to come together, and when they come together, wow, you get the complete picture, and that's the moment of transcendence. And I think it's so critical that the spiritual community actually integrate the material world, like fundamentally, and try, instead of separating, try to integrate the material world, and that the spiritual and that the physics community or the scientific community integrate that there is a component that is nonlinear to awareness that they have to integrate in, that is nonlinear and most likely non-local, to consciousness, that they have to integrate in their understanding of the mechanics of the universe.
We live in such an amazing time where this new paradigm is being birthed, and I'm so grateful personally to be in a position where both living in this old paradigm, like, being born before the use of like phones, to then the rapid development throughout the information age. And now humanity is baby steps away from the combination of both quantum computing and artificial intelligence, which when combined is going to have incredibly wild implications for our understanding of ourselves and how we navigate the world. And I'm just curious your thoughts on artificial intelligence as it relates to consciousness in the coming decade, as it's, we're right here. Humanity is on the birth of this AGI. And I'm just curious what thoughts you think that will have on the world on one hand, but then also consciousness and understanding of it.
This is a complicated issue. I would tend to say, and I'm probably gonna get in trouble for this, that both these things, quantum computing and AI, are not as advanced as we make it appear to be. Okay?
Okay.
Certainly in the case of quantum computing. And that true what we call artificial, I don't like the terminology artificial intelligence, because I don't think of intelligence as artificial in any case. So meaning that, like, if we succeed in putting intelligence in a technology, we will have reproduced something that's similar to us, meaning we're like a technology, physical thing that has intelligence, right? That's able to have creative thoughts and all this stuff. And I think that what we have is a really good feedback mechanism for a machine learning experience. And I think, so I'd rather think of it that way. I don't think that this is truly intelligence, what we have. We have a machine that is able to rectify errors that it's making, right? And able to learn about, the information that it's utilizing. But before the machine start becoming truly creative, I think we're going to have to make the machine something vastly different. So it might more look like a plasma device that has feedback, and that is able to, like, actually interact with the structure of the vacuum. And that's where truly will make a being that's connected, just like we are connected, and that will be like artificial intelligence at that point. But I think that machine learning as we have it today, what we call artificial intelligence as we have today, or machine learning, is going to help society fundamentally in the next few decades. It's going to advance us, exponentially. I can see it in physics even. The latest versions of ChatGPT, like the 3 version was making like you couldn't do any physics with it, you couldn't do any math with it. It was making like massive errors. Like it looked good, but then you start looking at it, and you go, whoa, this is not possible. And then so it was, but now it's actually quite good, and it's kind of nice when you put my paper in it. It it gives its opinion. It's quite correct, and so on. And so it's nice, and it's gonna help us move forward because we can actually now render much more information much more rapidly, right? Like ask ChatGPT to like give you the gist of this paper or the gist of this book that's that thick, that, and then like in 20 minutes you've got a pretty good idea of the formalism that's used, how it was done, and all this. It can be very, very useful. And it's going to advance society very fast. In terms of quantum computing and the capacity to compute all this, like I said, I think that quantum computing is going to have to go to a completely different level, because the quantum computing that exists today is based on a incomplete theory of quantum mechanics. And when we complete that theory, which I believe is done with the equations I wrote, then you'll see a better understanding of how you should build that quantum computer to tap into the 0-point energy or the information field, so that you can actually use the RAM of your computer is the universal network, space memory network. The memory drive of your computer is the universal network. So then you have true quantum computing because you're kind of logged on to the universal net. And that's where the feedback is happening instead of the human net. And now you have something that has very, very powerful capabilities. And, the fear that it's going to take over and go, oh, humans are actually useless, we should get rid of them. Well, that depends how you're going to grow the baby. Right? You have a baby. Babies are pure. They're beautiful. They don't want to kill anybody. They don't want to do anything wrong, right? But we traumatize our babies, and then we make, awful people out of them. Like, just because they're traumatized. They're wonderful people, masters in there, but they're so traumatized. They're afraid and all this. And so, like, when we make the first AI baby, how I think it's gonna be pure. I think it's gonna be wonderful. It's gonna be productive, loving, just like a baby is, right? And if we want to teach it to be mean, then that means we're not evolved enough to have those things, and they might take us over. But I don't think it's inherent.
Right. Yeah, I just think it's a big topic of discussion approaching the meta crisis with the exponential rise in technology and AI without the full capacity of wisdom that's needed to wield it, properly.
That can be scary.
It could be scary. And
for sure.
But it seems like this realm of duality, there will always be both spectrums of the possibility, like.
Yes. I mean, let's say tomorrow we access 0-point energy and we have infinite amount of energy, or, what are we doing with it? Are we using it to like be more efficient at killing each other? Or are we using it to like elevate all of humanity? Like, this is, but does that mean you shouldn't discover it? Does that mean you shouldn't bring it to the world? No, of course not. All have, you have to evolve, because there is a limited amount of time for planets to be stable.
Yep.
They don't just stay stable forever, right? Eventually, there's a meteorite that hits the atmosphere, or there's a sun flare. One little sun flare for the sun, right? The Earth is like a grain of sand beside the sun. So the sun just has a little fart, like, for the sun is like nothing, right?
Right.
And towards the Earth, if it hits square towards the Earth, you could just burn the atmosphere, and it would go just zit, and it would be over. And Jupiter wouldn't even notice. Jupiter would be, what was that? Oh, it was the Earth's atmosphere. Oh, and then Earth would look like Mars overnight, and so the fact that we're still here talking about it is fucking remarkable. It's like we're floating in grace. It's amazing that we're here. You have to, like, if you do the statistics, it looks really bad, and you have to start wondering, is there somebody making sure we're still around? Because, like, wow, super stable for that long. There was a meteorite that hit about 12,000 years ago that wiped out a good portion of a society that seemed to have been there before us, right? But so, 12,000 years of stability is quite remarkable, but I don't think we should push our luck. I think we have a limited amount of time to understand these fundamental principles about creation. I think all societies in the universe, any culture anywhere on any planet, eventually has to figure this out, because they're going to run out of resources on their planet, and the planet is going to change state and wipe out that society. So you have to learn to fly. You have to learn to fly. You have to learn how to control gravity, get into the space, right? Live amongst the galactic community and use planets as like the Garden of Eden that they are, and go and visit and have barbecues and have the wonderful stuff, but stop putting cement all over them, right? Like you that can go for a little while, but it's not sustainable.
Yeah. Man, I feel like throughout this whole conversation, there's been many points where I've got just like ignited and super excited about the timing of where we're at currently as a species. And I think it's the Lynn Twist quote that says, "There's nothing more powerful than an idea that's time has come." And right now it seems like there are certain ideas where it's their time to come, because the old outdated mythos of separation and ideologies that have gotten us to a point of the biosphere being destroyed and humanity approaching the meta crisis, like we are at a very pivotal point, and it can go one of two ways. And I think these emerging ideas are just really important to get out there as they start to come through people like yourself. So just immensely grateful for you sharing your work with the world and with our audience here. I know they self today, and this has just been such a fun conversation. Like I've loved every bit of this.
Me too.
Yeah.
I enjoy it very much. And I really, encourage your listeners to not dismiss it offhand because it seems so fantastic. But actually dig into it and look and like understand and so, especially if they're technical people,
Yeah.
Go and download the paper and read it with an open mind. Don't just dismiss it. You can't dismiss the math because it's correct. Like, there's 60,000 downloads of the paper. This is very rare that there's 60,000 download of a physics paper. And, if there was errors in it, I would have heard about it. It wouldn't have taken 8 months or whatever to hear about it. So but you might say, oh, but this is not what I was told, but like just go along and vision, just hold your judgment and just vision what it's saying, and the possibility of what it's saying, and I think it can really help transmute, like have trust in your feelings, in your instinct, in your knowing of what makes sense. And yeah, I would encourage your listener to really like invest in that path. Like, don't just talk about it. Don't just, do your little meditation every day. That's good. That's already a huge step. It's a really good thing. But get involved. Get in there. Jump in, and like participate. Whatever it is, like you can do to participate, because we need you. We need every one of you. We need every transcendent human being. We need every human being to move towards transcendence. It has to become the main, transformative power. It has to become the mainstream. And it is. It slowly is. It's poking its head everywhere. And it's driving some people crazy. But it's powerful. It's so powerful. And the thing that keeps me going is to see the light comes on in people's eyes when they realize their nature and their, profound connection to the whole. And there's nothing like it. And that keeps me going. That's for sure.
I feel that. And I really appreciate your invitation to the audience to not believe or disbelieve, to not dismiss or just quickly embrace, but to look with your eye, to really to look into it and know what you say you believe or what you want to embrace, to understand why you believe the things that you believe.
Yeah.
And yeah, just really being empowered in that knowing.
Yeah, I mean, people say we're so polarized. Well, okay. Do you really think that it's 100% one side or 100% the other? It's not. There's good in both sides.
Yeah.
So how come you can't have a conversation about it?
Yeah.
Like, talk about it. It doesn't take anything away from your opinion to talk about it.
Yeah.
So talk about it, look at it, like transpose yourself into the other point of view and say, oh, from that other point of view, what does it look like? Oh, it looks like this. But actually, that's pretty good. I could go with this, but I can't go with this part. And then, and then like, let's take the good from all sides, from all point of view, and build the new world with it. Like we can do that. It's very powerful.
I think that's something that I've just tried my best in my life and continue to stay and being squarely sane within reality. And to do so, your relationship with belief has to change, because belief is often a pacifier for our insecurity of not knowing. And only in admitting our not knowing, in admitting our ignorance, does the possibility of knowing become a reality or a possibility for us. And so I'm just inviting, again, reiterating what you're saying and admitting where we don't know what we don't know, and then examining the different perspectives. The last thing that I just want to I felt some emotion behind your eyes when you're talking about seeing the light that comes on within other people when they realize they're interconnected to the whole. And it seems like your work has been profoundly motivated and transformed, ignited by seeing that within other people and seeing the implications that it has on not just transforming the world, the science, the equations, but people's hearts. And so any last closing thoughts you have around that in particular, as the minds are starting to transform, but so are the hearts.
Yeah, so are the hearts. And, the deep feeling of alignment of the heart with the mind, and the balance that can occur from this. And then, And then, the excitement of feeling all this, like, wow, the power of this coherent state of like awareness that you can obtain, those clear state of awareness that you can obtain. And then when you're that excited, right, take it one step back. Take it one step back when you go and share with your friends, family, and this, because they might not be ready to hear it. You have to like tune it to the person you're talking to, right? You gotta bring it to a place where it's not so confronting, for them,
Yeah.
from their knowing. You- It's it's a sense of loving the other, even if you feel that they're going against what you're saying, right? And I'm not always good at it.
Yeah.
I guarantee you, I fail at that a bunch of time. But to have that compassion, I practice it, is so critical. To feel that compassion, the appreciation for the other and what they are bringing. Uh, and generally a fundamental sense of appreciation and awe for this incredible miracle of creation that we're in, just and wow, like to take the time every day to actually bathe in that, appreciation and the sense of self, of unity, of connection. And that is, even if you do it 1 second a day or 2 seconds a day, right? Like just like this, like to think, okay, I'm going to center, I'm going to feel that connection, I'm going to feel that appreciation for my life, for everything around me. Like even if it's just a passing thought, it changes everything. It changes everything. You become like, how Einstein was saying, uh, 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 an object is an extension of space. Well, there you become the tool of space. The space energy can use you to like, propagate, more appreciation, more love, more connection, more, and that's what drives you, at the end of the day, when you're going to be on the last few breaths of your life, which is I had the honor of observing from my father not so long ago. What's going to matter? What's going to matter in that moment is how much you loved, how much you felt, how much you experienced, how much you appreciated. It's all the beauty that your life had in it, so to like actually entertain that, even if it's a few seconds a day, it's very powerful.
Can't think of a better note to end on. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for that
you.
reminder, man. Nassim, I'm just so grateful for you, for your work, for your heart. And just last, where can people find your work? We'll link everything down in the description, but anything you want to point people towards who want to get more involved with what you're doing in
Yeah,
the world?
so we're at ISF, International Space Federation. It's spacefed.com, so spacefed.com. And over there, we're publishing articles, every week. Do we publish articles and like, keeping people up on the latest discoveries and the things that we're coming up with and all this, and so that people can stay in touch, people can become members. We sell, financial instruments to finance our research, so people can buy bonds, and that is so helpful if people buy bonds. And there is all kinds of ways they can get involved. We're looking for engineers to help us, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, other physicists, even physicists that want to criticize our paper. We're happy to have conversations with them. Whatever you want to get involved with, you can find it at spacefed.com. And we are in Geneva. The headquarters in Geneva. The laboratory is in France. We're on tours, so I go and give talks. I have talks in France coming up, in England coming up. Come and see me. Come and talk with me. It's gonna be super fun. We have so much fun. I just did LA yesterday. We had so much fun. We finished at 2 a.m. Yeah, like 2 a.m. I'm like, wow, we're gonna see the sun come up in a minute. Like I could have kept going, but then we got kicked off the rooftop. So it was like it's because there's so much to discuss. There's so much to discover together. And it's really when we're together that we can grow and evolve and transform. So much appreciation for all the people involved.
Yeah. Thank you again, Nassim, and everyone that you're working with for all the work that you're doing. Everything you want to, where people can find you will be linked down below. And then just for everybody that's been tuning into this almost 3-hour conversation, a little bit more. That's great. We just got lost in the black hole there. Man, it's been so awesome to meet more of our community in person recently, and just how beautiful they are, and how intelligent they are, and how caring they are, and how passionate they are about learning around so many of these topics that we even discussed in today's conversation. And let us know, share in the comments what was most uniquely impactful for you, and then also share this episode, share this conversation with somebody that you think would find it valuable and that could receive benefit from hearing the words that were shared in conversation today. Nassim, thank you, my man.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So great to be with you. Appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. Likewise, and everybody that's been tuning into this episode of the Know Thyself podcast, thank you. Until next time, be well, take care.